All right, I've got a flat tire on the Honda CRF50 motorcycle. This is going to be identical to the Honda XR50 as well, and then a couple of the other, even the 70s, a couple other the models are going to be identical to this. We are going to change this back tire, change the tube in this back tire. I'm going to show you how to do that with spoons, show you how to do it with a tire machine, show you what to do to remove the tire and then to put it back on. We've got the back tire off the ground right now. We've loosened up the axle. We've got a 19mm nut on this side and then a 14mm bolt that's going to run all the way through there. You want to make sure that when you're pushing this axle out that you try to push it out as straight as possible. Otherwise your chain tensioners here are going to bind. So once we get that loosened up, you can actually take your chain tensioner off on this side. That way you're not binding up at all. On this side, just keep in mind which direction that goes. And then you can take and push your axle off there. Again, kind of working it off at the same time with this chain tensioner. That way it's not binding. Be careful that your bike doesn't get pushed off the stand when you're doing this. I like to set that axle down. Now what I like to do is go ahead and remove your brake nut here, and I want to show you what that looks like. Looks like this here, so I'm going to go ahead and loosen this. Okay, so I'm just going to take and spin this off. Once we get it all the way off there, there's just a nut there. There's your cam that runs through there is what they call that. And then you've got your spring on there. So this whole thing's gonna be able to come back. We're gonna push it forward just slightly so that I can get that chain off. And then set that aside. Your wheel spacer already fell down there. And then take and pull that back tire off. Okay, once you get your wheel pulled off there, you can go ahead and just slide your brake caliper off of there, your brake panel. It's got your brake shoes on there. Inspect those, make sure they're in good condition. Then you can flip it over to the other side, have your sprocket on this side here. Obviously, you can't remove the sprocket, so we're gonna go ahead and put this in a clamp and change that tube out quick. I've got a tire machine to hold it. You don't actually need a tire machine to remove the tube. It does make it a little bit easier just to kind of hold it in place, but if you've got a friend that can maybe help you hold it in place, that's the main thing, because when you're trying to get that tire off of there, it's gonna kind of be sliding around a lot. If you want to, you can put like a 2x4 on either side here when it's on the ground. That way to get that sprocket so you're not wobbling. The other thing, you want to get a couple of spoons. But we've got your valve stem here. It just takes a 12mm wrench most of the time. And there's a nut on here that you've got to remove. Go ahead and remove that. If there's air in it at all, you want to get that air out. But most of the time you're changing the tube because it's got a hole in it. So if there's air in it now, pull that valve stem and get that air out of there. Otherwise, grab a spoon here and just start working your way around. I take and push down on this side to get that, get a little bit of pressure off of this side. And I've got spoons like this, and I can get you those if you're needing some, but they've got a little hook on one side. The other side's flat, or supposed to be flat. It looks like somebody took a hammer to this one. But then all you do is work yourself around the tire there, slide it, and then take about 2 inches, get underneath there, slide it up. You should be trying to keep that the bead of that tire up above the rim now at this point. A lot of times the other one will just fall out, and you can go on either side then and just do the same thing. If you've got painted black wheels or something, you'll be really careful. They actually make sliders for this that you can put in here to get underneath of your spoon. A wheel like this, we're not too terrible concerned about, just because this bike gets abused. And we're not too concerned about a little scratch. We wouldn't want to gouge the rim at all. Okay, now once you get, I'm going to turn it so you can see there. See. That valve stem is there is where I wanted to show you. Now what I do is take and grab up on the tire and then push down. That'll allow that tire to have a little, or that tube in there to get a little space to come out of there. But you want to push that valve stem out, and then as soon as you get it most of the way, I take and I grab the tube with my finger there, my middle finger there, and push it out of the hole there, and then just take and grab the tube and pull it out all the way around. I like to make sure that I know where how that tube came out, so that I can find that hole. Because if it's a spot that maybe a spoke is worn through your band, or maybe there's a nail in your tire, I like to know that. What happens a lot of times on these little bikes, because most of them don't have a rim lock, is they'll actually leak around the stem, which is what's happening here. And a lot of times what happens is that tire will get a little low. You'll put a big fat rider like myself on there, and you twist that throttle. That tire's gonna grab and twist. Well, because there's not enough air pressure in that tire to completely hold that tire in place, it's actually going to take and twist your entire tire around. It's going to take your tube, twist it as well. Well, your stem is going to stay in spot, but in that spot, but your tube's going to twist, and you're going to be putting a lot of pressure, and it's going to happen. What's going to happen is you're going to rip your stem just like that. A lot of times when I'm changing these tires, that's the reason why right there. People run with them too low, not enough air pressure in there. Putting the new one in there, I like to use a heavy duty tube, because so many times they get pinched going in, and you can have a professional tire changer and still on these smaller tires still end up pinching a tube. Now, a couple different ways of doing this. Sometimes I'll take and actually push the tread down, or the tire down, and then I take and slide that valve stem in there. We got to be really careful doing that. The other way you can do it is do it the same way you took it off. So raise it up just like that, slide your tube in, and then try to slide underneath it there. I like the first way better. So you can even take a spoon here, push it down, we'll take and put that tube in there and make sure there's no areas that are going to be pinched. Now what I do, and this is important, is I'll grab a container just like this, doesn't matter what it is, but just like this, and I'll put soap and water in there, and I'll just spray this all over the place so that when you're going back together, that tire will just slide right over top of the tube there. That way you're not ripping it. Otherwise, if it grabs a hold, you could potentially rip it when you do that. Okay, and then also, once I kind of get it strung out there, do a little bit more of that. And then it's important that you don't go out and immediately ride this motorcycle until that water evaporates and dries up, because you could have that tire slipping, kind of doing the exact same thing that I just warned you about. So I'm going to go ahead, put our nut on there, on our valve stem. There's different opinions as to if you're supposed to tighten that nut down. I think technically you're probably supposed to, but some people say if you leave it a little bit loose, then it won't rip it when you go and turn it. The thing is, you don't typically go out and ride your motorcycle, just twist that throttle one time. If you do it a couple times, doesn't matter if that valve stem nut is tight or not, you're going to end up ripping it anyways. So it might save you for a little bit, but at some point it'll probably rip on you. Yeah, I've got our valve stem out now. Now what I'm going to do is take and put a little bit of air to it, and you don't want to do much. You basically saw it on there, just a shot of air, just enough to take all of the twists out of there. Make sure you're not going to pinch it, and you want to make sure that that air is completely released out of there. Now what I'm going to do is, if any spots are dry, take a little bit more water, put it on there. A lot of times what you can do is take and press this tire on. You just don't want to go down there too far, because if you go too far, you're going to end up putting the bead of your tire on top of the tube. But I like to do that as far around as I can. And then when I can't go anymore, I like to do it in a spot where you can see. And you just want to barely get the tip of your fork underneath, or the tip of your spoon underneath of there. So otherwise you're going to end up pinching that tube. So if you can do it without putting the spoons in there, great. But most of the time when you get closer to the end there, you end up having to use your spoons. I'm going to turn this toward me so I can, want to make sure your spoon's not underneath of there. And this is where most people start pinching tubes. They get their spoon too far underneath of there, and they'll pinch a tube with their spoon here. Now I'm going to leave one in there, and I'm going to take them very carefully. Okay, now we've got that all folded underneath of there. You want to make sure, I grabbed some compressed air, and with the valve stem out still, I just take and put a little more air to it, just to make sure there's no pinches in it. Now you can take your valve stem, put it back in there. Take compressed air, put it in there, and I don't hear any leaks. You can take your bottle here of soapy water and spray it to see if there's any air bubbles. A lot of times you'll see a little bit of air bubbles because that air that was inside of the tire, that's it being trapped in between the tire and the tube, is coming out, and a lot of times that's coming out here. So don't be too worried if you see a little bit of air to start, but then that should go away. I'm going to take it off of our tire machine here. Check the other side, make sure it's seated properly. I'm going to do the same thing over here, just kind of check for air leaks. And I'm not hearing anything, which is a good sign. This isn't the only place that those air leaks will be, but it looks like we're going to be good to go. The reason why I don't put the sprocket up when I'm doing this is because when we got our spoons in here, taking tires off, putting tires back on, a lot of times you end up busting your knuckles on the sprocket. So I like to always keep that down. Sometimes you can hold that tire a little more flat the other way. The other thing I've seen people do, and not necessarily on these smaller ones, but they'll actually use this sprocket. So if they're taking the tire off, they'll actually use that sprocket to hook your spoon underneath of. And then same way when you're putting the tire back on, get it underneath of there, and then get the one beside it, and this spoon will pop up. You just want to be really careful you don't bust your knuckles up doing that. We're going to go ahead and throw this tire back on the motorcycle here. Got our tire ready to go back on here. I take and I put my brake panel on here. The brake panel's on there. And now when you're going on, maybe I should show you the other side, but just so you can see. But what you're going to do is slide the panel and your cam here onto the actual brake rod. Make sure you keep this slot lined up with the slot on your swing arm there, and then go ahead and slide your nut on there. So I'm going to set that tire there, and I'm just really paying attention to this side right now, and then at least get the nut started for your brakes. Start the nut there. Before you get too far, I'm going to take our chain, slide it on there, get that in place. And I like to take my foot then, just slide it underneath that tire, kind of hold that tire up while we get everything else started. Axle spacer too at the same time, or wheel spacer here. Kind of put this a lot of times you can just tip that wheel a little bit, slide that on, get that in place there. Make sure your chain tensioner is on there. It doesn't have to be in place yet. Start sliding that through, and then make sure everything's lined up on the other side here. No wheel spacer on this side. That's kind of what your brake panel is doing for you. Obviously, don't forget about your chain tensioner there. Slide that in. Slide your other tensioner on there, and then put your nut on there. Before you take the bike down off the stand, check your brakes. Make sure those are in the proper position. Make sure they're working properly. What I do a lot of times, I'll take my thumb and actually push down on the lever. That way I can spin this nut faster without pressure being on there. And you want to make sure that your brakes aren't wearing, or they're not constantly being engaged. So go ahead and double check that, and then torque this axle down. You want to make sure that your brakes are functioning properly. That's all set, and then you check chain tension. I also, while I'm here, I'm actually going to lubricate our chain. That way that's done for the next ride. So that is changing the tube on a Honda CRF50. If you've got questions or comments, make sure you leave those below, and I appreciate you watching.